In the golden palace of the Velnari Empire, two alien sisters stood before their father, the mighty King Theros. Princess Lyra and Princess Kaelra were known across the stars for their beauty and arrogance. They believed no race could ever rival their people, not even the humans who had recently joined the Galactic Union. That morning, in the Grand Throne Hall, the sisters laughed as they watched a human ambassador struggle to bow in the heavy gravity of their world. "Look at them, father," Lyra sneered, her silver eyes full of mockery. "Weak creatures who break under pressure." Kaelra smirked. "How could they ever survive the cold of Velnari or the wars of the void?" The courtiers joined in the laughter, their voices echoing like cruel music through the marble walls. But the king did not laugh. He watched them in silence, his old golden eyes filled with disappointment. When the room finally grew quiet, his deep voice rumbled like thunder. "You speak too easily of weakness, my daughters." The sisters exchanged glances, confused. "You believe humans are fragile because you see only their bodies," the king continued. "But strength is not only in muscle or power, it is in will." Lyra rolled her eyes. "With respect, father, what will could they have that rivals ours?" The king rose slowly from his throne, his armor gleaming under the cosmic light. "Then prove it," he said. Both sisters froze. "Prove it, father?" Kaelra asked softly. The king nodded. "If you truly believe they are weak, then you shall marry one." The court gasped. Whispers rippled like fire through the hall. The sisters' faces turned pale, their pride cracking. "Marry a human," Lyra shouted. "That is an insult." "It is a lesson," the king replied coldly. "You will live among them, learn their ways, and see what strength truly means." Kaelra tried to reason. "Father, this is madness. They are not our kin." The king raised his hand, ending all protests. "My word is law." Lyra clenched her fists, trembling with anger, but she dared not disobey. The royal court bowed as the king ended the session, leaving his daughters humiliated before all. Later that evening, the sisters sat together in their crystal chamber. Lyra paced restlessly. "He cannot be serious, a human husband." Kaelra sighed, looking out at the twin moons. "He has never spoken in jest." Lyra slammed her hand on the glass table. "I will not bow to a creature of dirt." But deep inside, even Kaelra felt a strange curiosity. "What if he is right?" she whispered. Lyra turned sharply. "Do not start thinking like him. We are Velnari, born from starlight." Kaelra smiled faintly. "And yet humans reach the stars too." Days later, the royal envoy announced the arrival of the chosen human. A single Terran ship entered Velnari orbit escorted by war cruisers. When the ramp opened, a man stepped out, tall, calm, dressed in a dark uniform marked with the insignia of the Terran Command. Commander Ethan Vale, the representative chosen by Earth. The palace guards watched him with silent contempt. He bowed lightly to the king, but met his eyes without fear. "Your Majesty," Ethan said in a calm voice, "I come as requested." The king nodded approvingly, sensing something unusual in him. Lyra leaned close to her sister, whispering, "He looks ordinary." Kaelra studied him quietly, noticing the way he carried himself, not like a servant, but like a warrior. When Ethan was presented before the royal court, the hall fell into tense silence. Some aliens laughed quietly at his plain human features. Others waited, curious to see what would happen next. The king addressed him, "Commander Vale, my daughters have spoken poorly of your kind. They believe humanity is weak." Ethan's expression did not change. "Then perhaps, Your Majesty, they should see for themselves." The king's lips curved into a faint smile. "Indeed, that is the purpose of your presence here." Lyra scoffed. "We do not need a test. I can already see his weakness." Ethan turned his gaze toward her, his calm eyes steady. "Appearances deceive, princess." The court murmured again, surprised by his boldness. Kaelra felt a flicker of respect she did not expect. That night during the royal feast, the sisters watched Ethan from across the table. He didn't boast, didn't show fear. He simply observed everything. The food, the guards, the stars beyond the palace dome. Lyra leaned back and smirked. So quiet. Maybe he knows he is unworthy. Kaelra replied softly. Or maybe he is thinking. Ethan heard them but remained silent. The king finally spoke, his voice filling the hall. Tomorrow begins the first trial. The sisters frowned. Trial? What trial? The king stood. If he survives it, you will treat him not as weak, but as equal. The room grew heavy, the guards stiffened, and Ethan simply nodded. I accept, he said firmly. Lyra laughed. You will regret those words, human. Ethan looked at her calmly. We humans often do, but we never stop. The king dismissed the court, and the night ended in whispers and tension. Outside the palace, the cold wind howled across the shining towers of Velnari Prime. Ethan stood on the balcony of his guest quarters, looking at the alien stars above. He knew this was more than a royal challenge. It was a test of humanity itself. Inside the royal chamber, the two sisters watched him from afar. Lyra's eyes burned with pride, Kaelra's with curiosity. Neither knew that this human would soon change their lives forever. The king watched from the shadows of his throne, a small smile on his lips. The test, he murmured, has already begun. At dawn, the crimson suns of Velnari rose over the shining city, bathing the palace in molten light. Commander Ethan Vale stood in the center courtyard, surrounded by armored guards and the sneering No. Bless of the alien court, before him stood Princess Lyra and Princess Kaelra, dressed in ceremonial armor, their expressions sharp with disdain. The king sat on his elevated throne, his voice echoing through the marble arena. The first trial begins now. The trial was simple in words, yet cruel in purpose. Ethan was to cross the path of storms, a vast corridor of high gravity, energy spikes, and magnetic storms. It was a test meant to break even trained alien warriors. Lyra smiled coldly. He will not make it halfway. Kaelra said nothing, though her eyes lingered on Ethan's calm face. As the signal blared, Ethan took his first step into the storm. Instantly, the air shimmered, lightning bolts cracked around him, the pull of gravity crushed against his chest like invisible hands. He staggered, every step a battle against the planet's brutal force. The aliens watched from their seats, some laughing, others shaking their heads. Pathetic, Lyra whispered. He will crawl before long. But Ethan didn't crawl. He pushed forward, one step, then another. His breath came in gasps, but his eyes burned with determination. Minutes turned to hours, and still he moved. The storm raged harder, slicing his suit with energy arcs, drawing blood. Kaelra's laughter faded, replaced by a strange silence. He should have fallen by now, she murmured. Lyra frowned. He's just stubborn, nothing more. But deep inside, both sisters felt a flicker of something they could not name. When Ethan finally reached the end of the corridor, collapsing on one knee, the entire arena fell silent. He looked up at the king and said hoarsely, "Trial complete." The king's expression softened with respect. "Indeed, Commander Vale." Lyra stood, angry and confused. He cheated. No human could endure this. Ethan looked at her, blood still dripping from his arm. "Humans endure worse every day, Princess. Vishigas." Room fell silent again, and Kaelra found herself lowering her gaze, unsure why. That day, even the palace guards began to whisper, maybe the human is different. Later, in the royal gardens, Ethan walked slowly along the glowing crystal flowers. Kaelra approached him, her tone colder than her words. "You survived, but do not think that changes who you are." Ethan smiled faintly. "Who I am doesn't change because of your opinion." She hesitated, surprised by his calmness. "You could have died." He nodded. "I knew that." "Then why did you go through it?" she asked. He looked up at the twin suns. "Because humans don't walk away from challenges. They face them, even when they bleed." Kaelra said nothing, but something inside her chest felt heavy, unfamiliar. From the shadows, Lyra watched them both, her eyes burning with jealousy and confusion. She didn't understand why her sister even spoke to him. That night, she called a council of her most loyal guards. "He must be shown his place," she hissed. "We will design a second trial, one he cannot survive." Kaelra overheard her and warned Ethan, "Do not join tomorrow's challenge." But Ethan only smiled. "If it's a test, I'll face it." "Why?" she asked again. "Do you want to die?" He turned to her and said softly, "No, Princess. I want to live, proving I deserve the stars." The next day, the second trial began. The sisters had chosen the Beast Arena, a massive dome filled with creatures from conquered worlds. The crowd roared as Ethan stepped into the center, unarmed. From the gates, a monstrous creature emerged, 10 feet tall, armored in bone and scales, roaring loud enough to shake the ground. Even the alien soldiers stepped back, but Ethan stood firm. He studied the creature's movements, waited for its charge, then dodged with lightning speed. When it struck again, he used a broken spear from the ground, stabbing through the beast's eye with precision and fury. The monster fell, the arena shook, and silence followed. Then slowly, the aliens began to cheer, not mockingly, but with awe. The king rose, his voice proud. "Enough, this test is complete." Ethan bowed slightly, blood on his hands, his breath steady. The king turned to his daughters. "Do you still see weakness?" Lyra looked away, her pride cracking for the first time. Kelra's heart raced, her voice soft. "No, father." Ethan looked at them both. "I didn't come here to prove humanity's strength, only to remind you it exists." His words echoed through the palace, touching even those who had despised him. That night, the king met Ethan privately. "You have done more than I expected, Commander," he said, "but the hardest test still awaits." Ethan frowned. What could be harder than this? The king's gaze darkened, winning not a battle but hearts that refused to see. Outside, in the silent corridors, the two sisters stood at opposite ends of the hallway, each lost in thought, each changed in a way they could not explain. Lyra's pride turned to quiet anger, Kalra's curiosity to growing respect, and in the endless night sky above Velnari Prime, the stars burned brighter, as if watching the story unfold. The king stared into the heavens from his balcony, whispering to himself, the storm was only the beginning. The palace buzzed with whispers after the arena battle. For the first time in Velnari history, a human had defeated a royal beast. The nobles who once mocked Ethan now spoke his name with reluctant awe, and the sisters who had laughed at humanity began to question what they truly knew. But peace in the palace never lasted long. In the shadows of the Grand Hall, General Vorak, the king's old war commander, watched with growing hatred. To him, humanity was a disease spreading through the galaxy. He whispered to his officers, "This human makes the princesses soft. We must end this before the king loses his throne." That night, Ethan was summoned again. The king sat upon his crystal throne, his expression unreadable. "You have proven your strength in body," the king said. "Now you must prove your strength in truth." Ethan frowned slightly. "Truth, your majesty." The king's gaze hardened. "Tomorrow you will face the trial of shadows, a test of mind and heart, not muscle." Lyra smirked from her seat. "Maybe this time he'll finally break." Kalra said nothing, her eyes lowered, her thoughts confused and heavy. The next day, Ethan entered the Hall of Mirrors, a massive chamber lined with ancient alien technology. Every wall reflected his image 1,000 times. Voices filled the air, echoes of the sisters' laughter, the crowd's mockery, and even the screams of past wars. The machine was designed to dig into the mind, to expose fear, guilt, and pain. Ethan's breathing slowed, his heart pounding as visions began to appear. He saw Earth burning under alien fire. He saw his comrades dying on distant moons. He saw himself kneeling before the graves of those he could not save. And in the reflection, he saw Lyra's mocking face whispering, "You are nothing but a fragile human." The room shook. The light twisted, and the mirror cracked. But Ethan didn't fall. He clenched his fists and whispered, "We are fragile, but we rise again." The energy of the chamber faltered, unable to break him. The king, watching through hidden screens, whispered to himself, "He resists even the void within." Outside the hall, the sisters waited. When Ethan finally emerged, his face pale and drenched in sweat, Kelra stepped forward. "You saw something," she said softly. He nodded. "My past." "Did it frighten you?" she asked. He looked up at her, his voice calm. "It reminded me why I fight." For the first time, Kelra smiled, not with pride, but with respect. Lyra crossed her arms, her tone sharp. "He survived another trick, so what?" But her voice trembled slightly, a weakness she didn't want anyone to hear. That evening, the king called for a banquet. The palace was filled with music and light, but tension hung heavy beneath the beauty. Ethan sat silently while Lenoblis whispered and stared. Kalra sat across from him, Curiosity now turned into something she couldn't explain. When their eyes met, the hall fell quiet for a moment. Lyra noticed and clenched her glass until it cracked. Suddenly, a blinding explosion shattered the calm. The walls trembled. Guards screamed. Smoke filled the chamber. From the shadows, General Vorak and his soldiers stormed in, weapons drawn. "Seize the human," Vorak shouted. "He is a spy from Earth." Chaos erupted. Beams of light cut through the hall. Ethan pushed Kelra behind him, grabbing a fallen guard's blade. Lyra shouted, "Guards, defend the king!" But many guards hesitated, some loyal to the general, others frozen in fear. Ethan fought with savage precision, each move fast and controlled. An alien soldier struck his shoulder, but he countered, sending the attacker sprawling. The sisters watched in shock as the human they mocked shielded them with his own body. When the general aimed his plasma rifle at Kelra, Ethan threw himself in front of her. The blast hit him in the side, searing his armor. He fell to one knee, but his eyes stayed locked on Vorak. "Run," he told Kelra. She shook her head, tears in her eyes. "No, I will not leave you." He smiled faintly. "Then fight with me." Together, they fought through the chaos until the royal guards regained control. The general was finally restrained, but not before shouting, "You will regret trusting him. He will destroy us all." As the smoke cleared, Ethan collapsed, his armor cracked, his blood dark against the marble floor. Kelra knelt beside him, trembling. "Stay awake, please." He looked at her and whispered, "Now you've seen it, the weakness you feared." She shook her head, tears falling. "That's not weakness. That's courage." The king approached slowly, his expression grave but proud. "Take him to the healers," he commanded, "and split the guard." Hours later, as Ethan lay unconscious in the healing chamber, Kelra sat beside him. She watched his chest rise and fall, his human form fragile yet unyielding. She whispered to herself, "He fights for honor, not power, not pride. Maybe Father was right." From outside the door, Lyra listened, her eyes full of conflict, her pride warring with something she didn't want to admit. She turned away, whispering coldly, "This human is changing everything." In the throne room, the king stood before the stars, hands clasped behind his back. He knew the attack had deeper roots. "Someone in this palace still wants the human dead," he murmured. And somewhere in the shadows, a hidden figure watched, sending a silent transmission into the void. The human must not live to see the final trial. The winds of Velnari howled outside, carrying the sound of war drums in the distance. For the first time in centuries, the empire trembled, not from an army, but from a single human's will. The palace of Velnari was no longer the same. Since the night of the attack, every corridor felt colder, every shadow deeper. Commander Ethan Vale lay in the royal healing chamber, wrapped in shimmering stasis light. Days passed, yet he did not wake. Princess Kelra visited every morning, sitting beside him, her silver hands resting gently near his. She spoke to him, though he never answered, telling him of the stars, the court, the whispers outside the door. Sometimes she smiled, sometimes her voice trembled. She did not understand why her heart ached for this fragile human, but every time she looked at his scars, she saw strength that no alien had ever shown. One night, as the twin moons shone through the glass walls, Ethan's eyes flickered open. His voice was weak. "Still alive," he murmured. Kelra gasped, leaning forward. "You shouldn't talk." Ethan smiled faintly. "If I stop talking, you'll think I'm dead." She laughed softly, a sound she hadn't made in years. "You risked your life for me," she whispered. "Why?" He looked at her, his voice quiet. "Because, it means nothing if you don't protect something worth dying for." Her heart trembled, words lost in the space between them. Outside the chamber, Lyra stood hidden behind the wall, her fists clenched, jealousy burning in her veins. She couldn't understand why her sister, the proud heir of Velnari, was drawn to this human. When Ethan had first arrived, she only saw him as a joke, a test from her father. But now her chest burned every time she saw him smile at Kelra. Lyra whispered to herself, "He's changing her, and he will destroy us all." The next day, Ethan walked through the gardens with slow steps, recovering but unbroken. The royal guards nodded as he passed, once enemies, now silent witnesses to his courage. Kalra walked beside him, pointing toward the glowing rivers of energy that flowed beneath the palace. "This is our life source," she said softly. "The heart of Velnari." Ethan nodded. "Beautiful," he said, "but fragile too, like everything alive." She turned to him. "You always see weakness as something powerful." He smiled, "Because that's what makes us human." Their peaceful moment was interrupted by a call from the throne room. The king had summoned them both. When they arrived, they found Lyra already there, her face calm, but her eyes sharp. The king spoke with a heavy voice. "A rebellion brews beyond the eastern stars." He looked at Ethan. "The general's followers have fled the planet. They prepare to strike again." Ethan stepped forward. "Then let me face them." Lyra laughed coldly. "You can barely stand." But the king raised his hand. "He will go." Both sisters turned to him in shock. Kalra protested. "Father, he is still healing." The king's voice was firm. "This is his destiny, and perhaps yours too." Later that night, as Ethan prepared for the journey, Kalra came to him. "Take me with you," she said suddenly, her eyes glowing faintly. In the moonlight, Ethan shook his head. "It's too dangerous." "I'm not asking," she said. "I am deciding." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You are stubborn," he whispered. She smiled. "Maybe I'm learning from you." As their ship lifted into the sky, Lyra stood on the balcony, her heart torn. She whispered into her wrist communicator, "Follow them. Do not let them succeed." In the shadows, a cloaked figure nodded. "As you command, princess." But as Lyra watched the ship vanish into the stars, her eyes filled with something that looked like regret. "Why do I feel like I'm making a mistake?" she murmured. Far from Velnari, Ethan and Kelra's vessel glided through the void. The stars shimmered like cold fire outside the windows. Kelra watched Earth's soldier working with quiet fascination. "How can someone so small fight against empires?" she asked. Ethan looked at her and said softly, "Because we remember what it feels like to lose everything, and we never want it to happen again." Silence fell between them, but it was a silence filled with understanding. Suddenly, the ship's alarms blared, red lights flashing across the cabin. "Enemy ships inbound," Ethan shouted. Kaelra ran to the console, her voice sharp. "They are Velnari signatures, our own people." Ethan frowned. "Your sister's doing." Explosions rocked the hull, and the stars outside turned into streaks of burning light. Ethan took control of the ship, diving through the asteroid field, his hands steady despite the chaos. Kelra fired back, her voice trembling. "Why would Lyra do this?" "Because she's afraid," Ethan replied, "afraid of what you're becoming." The chase tore through the asteroid belt, debris crashing around them. Ethan's eyes stayed fixed on the sensors, his voice calm under pressure. He maneuvered between rocks the size of cities, each move defying the laws of physics. Kaelra stared in disbelief. "No alien pilot could do this." He smiled faintly. "We learned to fly through hell long before we reached the stars." A missile struck the side of the ship, throwing them both against the wall. Sparks rained down, alarms screamed, but Ethan pulled himself up, bleeding yet focused. He triggered the emergency thrusters, sending the ship plunging toward a nearby moon. The impact shook the ground, fire and dust erupting into the sky. When the smoke cleared, the ship lay broken, but they were alive. Kelra gasped for air. "You saved us again." Ethan leaned against the wreckage, exhausted. "We're not safe yet." As they looked to the horizon, a massive shadow appeared. Alien war machines rising from the mist. Velnari hunters sent to finish what the rebellion started. Ethan reached for his weapon, eyes blazing. Kalra stepped beside him, her voice steady. "Together." He nodded. "Together." High above, unseen by both, Lyra watched from her own warship. Her hands shook as she whispered, "What have I done?" The king, far away on his throne, stared into the stars. He felt the tremor through the royal link and whispered to himself, "The true trial begins now." The silver moon burned beneath a sky filled with fire. The crash had torn the land open, and smoke curled like ghosts across the ruins. Ethan stood beside Kelra, his weapon glowing faintly in the cold air. Before them marched the Velnari hunters, elite soldiers, faces hidden behind obsidian helmets. Their leader raised his spear and shouted, By command of Princess Lyra, the human dies here. Kelra froze, her heart twisting at her sister's name. Ethan's voice was calm. So this is her answer. The ground shook as the first wave charged. Ethan moved like lightning, firing controlled bursts, each shot clean and precise. Kelra joined him, her twin blades slicing through armor with blinding grace. The clash of steel and plasma filled the night, but for every enemy they struck down, two more appeared. Too many, Kelra gasped, her energy blade flickering. And Ethan looked around, searching for cover. We fall back to the ridge. They ran across the broken plain, smoke rising behind them. Ethan's armor was cracked, his side bleeding again. Kelra saw him stumble and grabbed his arm. You're hurt. He grinned faintly. You noticed. Even in chaos, his humor made her heart ache. They took shelter behind a fallen warship, its hull glowing with alien runes. As explosions shook the ground, Kelra whispered, My sister did this. Ethan's eyes met hers. No, fear did this. Fear of what? She asked. Fear of change, he replied softly. Fear that humanity might not be the weak ones anymore. From the horizon, the sky blazed with new light. A massive warship descended, Lyra's flagship, the Crown of Shadows. Its engines roared like a storm, and the moon trembled under its presence. Kelra's heart pounded. She came herself. Ethan tightened his grip on his weapon. Then this ends tonight. As the ship landed, Lyra emerged, dressed in black armor that shimmered like liquid darkness. Her eyes burned with anger, but behind that fire hid guilt. You've gone too far, Kelra, she shouted. You've betrayed your blood for a human. Kelra stepped forward, her voice shaking. No, sister, I've seen what you refuse to see. Lyra laughed bitterly. And what is that? That strength is not only in power, Kelra said. It's in heart, in mercy, in hope. Lyra raised her weapon. Then you are lost. Before she could fire, Ethan stepped between them. Don't do this, he said, his voice calm but fierce. You think you can speak to me, human, Lyra spat. Ethan's gaze didn't waver. I don't think I know because I've seen what fear does. It turns kings into tyrants, sisters into enemies. His words hit harder than any weapon. Lyra hesitated, her hand trembling, her pride fighting her pain. Then, suddenly a blast of plasma struck from behind her, throwing her to the ground. Ethan turned sharply. Soldiers from the rebellion had arrived, attacking everyone, even Lyra's loyal guards. The battlefield dissolved into chaos again. Explosions ripped through the rocks and flames painted the sky red. Ethan pulled Lyra to safety, shielding her with his own body. Kelra screamed over the noise. They're turning on her. Ethan gritted his teeth, because hate always eats its own. He fought like a storm, every move powered by desperation and will. Kelra fought beside him, her strength matching his rhythm, their bond shining even in darkness. When the last wave finally fell, silence returned, broken only by the hum of dying engines. Lyra lay on the ground, her armor shattered, her breath shallow. Kelra knelt beside her, tears streaming. Sister, why did you do this? Lyra's voice was weak. Because I couldn't stand seeing you love him. Kelra froze, her heart breaking at the confession. Ethan looked away, giving them their moment, his eyes full of quiet sorrow. Lyra reached out, her trembling hand touching Kelra's. I wanted to protect our bloodline, she whispered, but I destroyed it instead. Kelra shook her head, crying, No, you can still make it right. Lyra's eyes softened. Then listen to me, Kelra. There's something you don't know. Before she could finish, another explosion thundered in the distance. The rebels had activated something deep within the moon, a hidden weapon, a pulse core capable of destroying everything within its reach. Ethan's eyes widened. They're going to wipe the entire colony. Kelra grabbed his arm. We must stop it. Lyra coughed weakly. It's buried beneath the crater. Only the royal code can shut it down. Ethan looked at Kelra. Can you do it? She nodded, wiping her tears. Yes, but we'll need time. He helped Lyra onto a hover sled, securing her before turning to Kelra. Then let's move, he said, his voice sharp again. They raced across the burning wasteland, every second precious. The core's light grew brighter, pulsing like a heart about to explode. Ethan fought through waves of enemy drones while Kelra hacked the ancient control panel. The air crackled with power, the countdown echoing through the valley. 5 minutes, Kelra shouted. Ethan's voice boomed over the chaos. You have 4. As the final locks disengaged, Kaelra screamed, "Done!" Ethan slammed the override switch and the glowing core dimmed, collapsing into silence. For a moment, the world stood still. Then a soft breeze passed through the battlefield, the sound of life returning. Lyra's sled came to a stop near them. She looked up weakly at Ethan, her voice faint but sincere. "You saved us all. Human." Ethan shook his head. "No, princess. You saved yourselves." Kaelra knelt beside her sister, holding her close. "It's over." But Lyra's eyes drifted shut, her final whisper barely a breath. "Tell father. I understand now." Kaelra screamed her name, clutching her lifeless body. Ethan looked away, his jaw clenched, the weight of the moment sinking deep into his chest. The sky above them cleared, the stars shining through the fading smoke. Kaelra whispered through her tears, "She was wrong, but she was still my sister." Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice quiet but strong. "She found truth in the end. That's all any of us can do." As dawn broke over the ruined moon, the king's fleet appeared on the horizon. He had arrived too late to stop the war, but just in time to see the cost of pride. He stepped from his ship, his golden cloak fluttering in the wind. When he saw Ethan standing beside Kaelra and the fallen Lyra, he lowered his head in sorrow. "The test," he murmured, "has turned into a tragedy." But Ethan looked up at him, his voice steady. "No, your majesty, it became a lesson." The king met his gaze and for the first time bowed slightly. "The galaxy will remember this," he said, and the wind carried his words across the silent battlefield. The battlefield lay silent beneath the pale light of dawn. Ash drifted across the ruins like snow, whispering of all that had been lost. Princess Kael. Ra knelt beside her sister's still body, the once proud heir of Velnari now resting in peace. Commander Ethan Vale stood nearby, his armor scorched, his face lined with exhaustion but not defeat. Above them, the royal fleet hung motionless, mourning and waiting. When the king descended from his flagship, the air itself seemed to bow. His golden cloak fluttered through the smoke as he approached his daughters. He knelt beside Lyra, his trembling hand brushing her hair. "My child," he whispered, "your pride has returned to dust." Kaelra looked up, tears streaking her silver skin. "Father." "She died trying to fix what she broke." The king nodded slowly. "Then she found redemption." His gaze shifted to Ethan. "And you, human, you've changed the blood of kings." Ethan lowered his head. "I only did what was right." The king's eyes gleamed with sorrow and curiosity. "You did what few beings ever do. You loved without boundaries." But the moment of calm didn't last. A tremor ran through the moon's crust, deep and violent. Kaelra turned sharply. "The core, it's awakening again." Ethan checked the scanner on his wrist, his expression grim. "It's not the same energy. It's something new." From the crater's heart, light erupted like a second sunrise. The king's guards drew their weapons, but Ethan raised his hand. "No, wait." Out of the swirling light emerged a figure. Not human, not alien, but made of energy and memory. It spoke in a voice that vibrated through every living being. "The test of unity is not over." Kaelra stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Who are you?" The being shimmered, shifting between forms, sometimes Lyra, sometimes Ethan, sometimes the king himself. "I am the will of the stars," it said, "the ancient echo that created your empires and guided your wars." Ethan's eyes widened. "You mean the origin?" The being nodded. "Every race that reaches the light must face a final question. Can they rise together or fall apart?" The king whispered, "This was never about pride. It was about balance." Suddenly the ground cracked, energy surging upward, forming a spiral of burning light. The being's voice deepened. "Only one among you can bear the burden to restore the balance." The king turned to Ethan and Kaelra. "It is your choice now." Kaelra looked at Ethan, fear in her eyes. "What happens if we fail?" The being's answer was simple. "Then both your worlds will fade." Ethan stepped closer to Kaelra, his hand resting on her shoulder. "Listen," he said softly. "This isn't about us. It's about proving that our hearts can stand as one." She looked into his eyes, seeing something human yet infinite. "Then let's face it together." The being extended its hand, and the light swallowed them both. They were lifted into the core, a vast chamber of energy and memory, filled with visions of past and future. Ethan saw Earth burning, then healing, then reaching the stars. Kalra saw her people learning, evolving, changing. Voices whispered all around them. Strength without compassion destroys, compassion without strength fades. The test had begun. Illusions appeared, battles, temptations, and memories of pain. Ethan faced a vision of himself commanding a human fleet that destroyed Velnari. Kalra faced a world where humans betrayed her trust. Both were pushed to the edge of doubt, but Ethan reached out through the fire and shouted, "We are not our fears." Kalra grabbed his hand, her voice echoing through the chamber. "We choose unity." The light exploded, brighter than a sun. The ground stilled, the energy quieted, and the being's voice softened. "You have done what countless empires failed to do," it said. "You've proven that will and heart can coexist." The chamber faded, leaving them standing on solid ground again. The king and his guards stared in awe as the sky above shifted color, from red to calm blue. The stars themselves seemed to breathe. Kalra turned to Ethan, her voice full of wonder. "What did we do?" He smiled faintly. "Maybe we just reminded the galaxy what it means to be alive." The being's voice lingered one last time. "The human and the heir of Velnari will now carry the flame of balance." Then it vanished, leaving behind a single crystal glowing in Ethan's hand. The king approached slowly. "You have united bloodlines that were never meant to meet." Ethan bowed slightly. "Maybe that was the universe's plan all along." Kalra looked at her father. "Then the trials are over." The king's eyes glistened. "No, my child. The trials never end. They only change form." That night, under a sky reborn, the Velnari and the humans worked side by side rebuilding what was lost. Kalra stood beside Ethan, watching the city lights flicker again. "You know," she said softly, "if someone had told me a human would change our world, I'd have laughed." Ethan smiled. "I'd have laughed too." She turned toward him, her voice barely a whisper. "You're not just human anymore." He chuckled. "And you're not just alien anymore." Far away, the king looked up at the stars, his heart heavy yet full of hope. He whispered to the wind, "Perhaps this was the destiny I never understood." And from the heavens the faintest whisper replied, "It was always written." Peace returned, but not for long. Word of the human who united the royal blood of Velnari spread through the stars like wildfire. In the halls of the Galactic Council, ancient voices rose in fear. "Humans grow too fast," one alien elder hissed. "They defy order." Another answered, "A union between human and royal blood could shift power across galaxies." And so, in secret, the council voted they would erase the Velnari Empire and humanity together, before the balance turned against them. Back on Velnari Prime, Ethan Vale stood on the royal balcony, watching ships rebuild the cities he had saved. Beside him stood Princess Kalra, the light of twin suns shining on her silver skin. For the first time, she smiled without fear. "Our people live again." Ethan nodded, but his eyes stayed on the sky. "And yet I feel something coming." Moments later, the palace alarm screamed across the capital. A fleet unlike any before filled the heavens. Massive warships bearing the emblem of the Galactic Council. Kalra's breath caught. "The Council, they're here." The king stormed into the command hall, his golden armor shining. "Prepare for defense." Ethan stepped forward. "Let me talk to them." The king frowned. "They will not listen." Ethan's voice stayed calm. "Then they'll listen to what they fear. The truth." A beam of light descended, projecting the council's envoys into the chamber. Tall, cold, faceless beings of light and logic. "King Theros of Velnari," the voice echoed, "and human Commander Vale, you have violated the ancient law of separation." The king's tone was iron. "We violated nothing but pride." The envoy's eyes flickered. "You created a union that threatens universal order." Ethan stepped forward. "You mean it threatens your control?" The light pulsed sharply. "Silence, human." But he didn't stop. "You fear what you can't dominate, a bond stronger than your politics." The hall trembled as the council prepared their sentence. Velnari Prime will be purged, and humanity will be quarantined forever. Kalra's voice broke. "You can't." The envoy turned to her coldly. "It is already done." Ethan glanced at the king, then at Kalra, his eyes full of quiet fire. There's one thing you still don't understand, he said, stepping into the beam of light. Humans don't ask for mercy, we make our own fate. With emotion, he activated the ancient crystal the being of light had given him. The room filled with a blinding pulse, the beam shattered, the council's link broke, and the sky above the planet rippled like a living storm. The king shouted, "What have you done?" Ethan's voice echoed through the wind. "I opened the key. 8 the stars left for us, the one power beyond any empire." Kael'ra ran to him. "You can't control it." He smiled sadly. "Maybe not, but I can guide it." Outside, the fleet began to fall apart, ships twisting in luminous waves as the energy spread. It was not destruction, it was awakening. Every living being felt it, a pulse of truth that tore away fear. The council's soldiers dropped their weapons, their eyes glowing with light. Kael'ra gasped. "What is happening?" Ethan whispered. "The revelation, the unity the being spoke of. It's not a myth, it's alive." But the power was too much for one man to hold. His body flickered, light bleeding through his skin. Kael'ra screamed, "Ethan, stop, you'll die." He looked at her softly. "Someone has to carry the fire." She grabbed his hand. "We'll carry it together." He shook his head, smiling. "No, Kael'ra, you must live to teach them." The king's voice thundered, "You cannot." But Ethan's body was already fading, turning into the same radiant energy that had saved them once before. The wind roared through the throne room as he looked at Kael'ra one last time. "Tell them," he whispered, "humanity was never weak. We were just waiting to be understood." Then the light consumed him, rising into the sky like a new star. Every ship, every city, every being looked upward as the heavens themselves shifted. The fleets of the council retreated, blinded and humbled, and the war ended not with blood, but with light. When silence returned, Kael'ra fell to her knees, her tears glowing like crystal. Her father placed a trembling hand on her shoulder. "He became the bridge between worlds." She whispered, "No." He became the heart of them. Years later, the galaxy told legends of the human star. Children on countless worlds grew up hearing how a man from Earth united races that once hated each other. The Velnari rebuilt under Kael'ra's rule, now allied with humanity, and every year, on the day the skies burned gold, she stood on her balcony and whispered to the wind, "Ethan Vale, wherever you are, your light still guides us." High above, a single star shimmered brighter than all others, and across the universe, its glow whispered one eternal truth: strength is born from struggle, but greatness is born from unity.